OpenLine, we are coming up on the half hour. First of all, thank you for joining us. We are talking about Native American Heritage Month. Our guest tonight is Albert Bender, a Cherokee activist. Thank you for joining us. We want to get right to the phone lines. This is OpenLine, so let's do that. Dante is on the line. Good evening, Dante.
Good evening.
Go ahead.
Good evening, Mr. Bender. I wanted to ask what your thoughts were to Vanderbilt's lack of land acknowledgement and lack of resources for indigenous students.
Dante, you're right on cue. We were just talking about this in the break. I don't think that's a coincidence. Dante, I'm going to hang up on you so you can listen on the air, okay? Thank you for calling in.
You.
All right, take it away. We were just speaking about this.
Yes, this is an issue that we were just speaking about. I was bringing to the attention here of the program is the fact that the chancellor of Vanderbilt, and I have trouble getting his name right. He's from Germany, and I believe the pronunciation is Demir. He is opposed to Vanderbilt University adopting a land acknowledgement which would recognize the land that Vanderbilt University sits upon and the fact of which Native Nations land the university sits upon, which is Cherokee land. And again, I don't know why the chancellor has adopted a position in opposition to the land acknowledgement, but I've also been advised that he's also in opposition to Indigenous Peoples Day. And to me, that is just mind-boggling. It's astounding. And also, it's, I can describe it no other way than to say it's irrational. But the chancellor's positions needs to be exposed to the society and mainstream society to bring about some change in some type of negotiation or some type of communication to rectify this, what I would characterize as a severe oversight on the part of Vanderbilt in doing this, taking this minimal step for consideration of the Native Nations that existed before Vanderbilt came into existence.
Is this common for this to happen when it's brought to an institution's attention or whatsoever for there to be resistance to just recognize?
I have not fathomed or heard of this happening in any other instance. Land acknowledgements have been ongoing for at least, I'd say, the last 20 years. And it's considered by a lot of us as something that's routinely done. In other words, it's the minimum, the very minimum consideration that can be given by an institution to the Native Nations who have been dispossessed of the land that the institution sits upon.
And are we talking about something like putting up a marker on campus to say, this is where this land came from, this is who it belonged to, here's who came before? Is that
I
what
would
we're
say
talking
that
about?
a marker would be extremely appropriate, but right now we're not even asking for a marker to be put up. We're just asking for recognition on paper being given to the people who existed before that particular institution came into existence. And for the chancellor to be in opposition to that, it is it's beyond unreasonable. It's irrational. It doesn't make any sense.
Sounds like a dialogue needs to be started.
Yes, a dialogue definitely needs to be started to correct this severe and atrocious oversight on the part of Vanderbilt University.
Let's get back to the phone lines. Mike is on the line. Mike, good evening.
Hey, good evening, Carrie, and good evening to your guest. I respect him highly. Everything he's saying is right, but one thing I have to say is that America does not care about Native Americans who they stole the land from And they sure don't care about Africans who are brought here and kidnapped here and brought here to work the land. Other ethnic groups get certain considerations. I don't have to go through that to let you know who that ethnic group is, but Native Americans and blacks have been treated poorly, not just by the racist Andrew Jackson, which is, and they should tear down that mansion out there. He represents hate and evil. But I get sick and tired of black people and indigenous people being treated like crap, and everybody trying to forget our history and don't want to tell the young kids about our history because they know it's atrocious what happened and hindrance, and it shouldn't have happened. It's just pure evil what these two ethnic groups have been through in this country by European, white, Caucasian people. Thank you.
Mike, thank you for calling in. I'll let you take the floor on that.
Yeah, I think that his comments are right on course, because the genocide, in particular the genocide that Native American people have experienced, has been exemplified in so many ways over the centuries, over the decades, over the centuries that this country has been in existence. One example is the issue of boarding schools and the investigation that is being conducted now by the Department of the Interior, which is being headed by a Native person, an indigenous person, Deb Holland from Laguna Pueblo. And the boarding school issue is, as I said, being investigated because over a period of 100 years or more, tens of thousands of Native children were sent to boarding schools in the United States and subjected to all types of the most atrocious conditions, including sexual molestation and abuse. And it's estimated that at least 40,000 Native children, indigenous children, perished in those boarding schools. And that is another one of the atrocities that's been committed against Native people in this country. And also, this is an issue that's coming up before the Supreme Court about the Indian Child Welfare Act because there is a suit before the Supreme Court to have the Indian Child Welfare Act declared unconstitutional, and if that happens, then once again Native children will be put into non-Native foster homes, white foster homes, and that is another big issue that's pending before Native nations in the United States, and that is another issue. If the Supreme Court rules against the Indian Child Welfare Act, that will be another situation of where genocide will once again be taking place, because under the rules of the United Nations conventions against genocide, to take the children of one group and to place them with another group, that is committing genocide against the victimized group. And so what the gentleman said is completely correct. Genocide and atrocious treatment of Native people and African Americans, which took place since the founding of this country, is on the verge of being continued again, in particular against Native Americans, with the attempt of the legal processes in this country to once again see our children taken away from our communities.
Let's get back to the phone lines. Tanya is on the line. Tanya, thank you for being part of the conversation tonight. Go ahead.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Good evening, Carrie, and your honored guest. I'm calling because I'm Cherokee Indian, and my great-great-grandfather, Deuce Carrie, walked the Natchez Trace line with 7 children, and only one survived, and one of them was my grandfather.
Wow.
And I am calling to see, is there any help for Cherokee Indians in Tennessee to get help that live off the reservation?
Good question. Thank you for calling, Tanya.
Well, it depends on what kind of help that the caller is seeking. I would say this, that for medical help, especially for Cherokees, you can go to the IHS hospital or the Cherokee Indian Hospital that's owned and operated by the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, and that's for medical help. Now, for other kinds of help, and I'm not specifically sure what type of help the caller is referring to, but I would say this: I am the coordinator of the American Indian Coalition, and we will look into all types of problems that Native people in the Middle Tennessee and Tennessee and state of Tennessee encounter, and I would say that
if she can get a hold of you,
yeah, she can get a hold of me.
Point her in the right direction.
Yeah, we can point her in the right direction for any kind of help that she so seeks.
Sure. Tanya, if you want to give us a call back on the line, our producers will take your name and number, and I'll get it to Albert. How about that? So go ahead and call the number 615-737-PLUS, like you just did, and we'll get your name and number, and we'll pass it along.
And I'll call you right back.
Good.
I will
Hopefully we're making
you.
a good connection there. Mac is also holding on the line. Hi, Mac. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I got my kids watching this show all the time, and every time someone comes on, now I'm trying to teach them about racism and whatnot, but every time something comes on, it's like white people are always racist towards all that. And we don't have a time machine. I was born in '75. These kids are born in the 2000s, and I can't teach them that now they're just white racist kids. What am I supposed to tell them when they hear these comments?
Okay. I'm sure Mac's not the only person that feels that way. How do you respond to that?
Well, I would say this. That relates to the history of how white people in general have treated Native indigenous people in general. But I would say further that the younger generation of white people, kids, don't have to feel that, well, I will say, I'll put it this way. If you feel that your race has committed atrocities against another race, I would put it in this from the standpoint of saying that you need to work with Native American people, work with African American people in their organizations to see how that you can be of assistance in helping us to further our political, civil rights, need for greater education, need for the things that we are fighting for in this country to make a better life for ourselves and also for all people in this country. So I would say that if white kids feel guilty about what has happened, then work with us and we can absolve you of some of that guilt by working together.
And it's by telling the stories of history and the facts of what happened does not make someone today who's born today racist. That's not what you're saying, as I understand it, and hopefully Mac will understand it. But history is true, and we have to acknowledge it. We can learn from it. We can do better, right?
Yes, we can do better. And I think this relates also to what has been called the critical race theory. And some of the conservative white politicians in this country are saying, well, they don't want the critical race theory taught, so forth and so on. But to me, it's not critical race theory. It is teaching the facts of history. And for the facts of history to be taught is something that all the people of this country need to become aware of and be knowledgeable about in order that we can move on beyond where we are now in this country.
We have taken another break, and I said this when we were going to our last break, but I do want to talk about those current issues, those current battles that are still there. So we will do that when we come back. Stay with us.